Around 1:30 a.m. on January 23, 2022, somebody opened fire on a birthday gathering inside a rented house on North Park Avenue. Breahna Stines had just turned 20, her older sister was there beside her, and more than 40 rounds ripped through the celebration. By the time police reached that Inglewood block, 4 people were dead, 1 man was critically wounded, and the party had become something investigators could not explain quickly. What made it stranger was that similar decisions would surface in 4 other cities, where crews chased revenge, crossed neighborhoods, or showed up hunting people who were never there. To understand why Park Avenue mattered, you have to picture the house before that night when neighbors knew it mainly as a short-term rental. The property sat in the 1300 block of North Park Avenue, where one next-door neighbor said the street had stayed peaceful since he moved there in 2008. For roughly 2 years, unfamiliar faces had rotated through the Airbnb without serious trouble, so nothing about the address suggested a massacre was coming. That changed during Breahna Stines' 20th birthday, when her 25-year-old sister Marneysha Hamilton came over to celebrate with her. Teron Whitaker Jr. and Jaden Griffin, both 21, were also inside the gathering, while another man would survive the shooting in critical condition. Once the gunfire stopped, Breahna, Marneysha, Teron, and Jaden were dead, leaving detectives with a crowded scene and very little public explanation for who had ordered it. Breahna and Marneysha's mother later described both daughters as outgoing young women with futures ahead of them, which gave the loss a face beyond crime scene numbers. Inglewood officials said more than 40 rounds were fired, while some reports placed the total above 100, with evidence pointing toward an assault rifle and handgun. That kind of firepower made the attack look planned, yet investigators still had to figure out whether the target came from inside the party or somewhere outside it. The first real clue was messy, with a law enforcement source saying Mob Peru members or associates were among the guests gathered at the rental. According to that same account, an argument had broken out before the shooting, while some people inside reportedly worried the situation might turn physical. That detail gave detectives one possible path, although public reporting never established whether the dispute actually triggered the ambush or simply happened before shooters arrived. The address itself offered no clean answer either, as the steady rotation of Airbnb guests made it harder to connect the house with one permanent group. So, for a while, the whole situation looked like one savage night with a murky motive, while the bigger pattern stayed outside public view. 18 months later, prosecutors finally exposed that wider picture through a 37-count grand jury indictment involving 7 men. That indictment named Kendall Taylor, Corey Irvin, and Khalil Santos as suspected East Coast Crips 118 members or associates connected with an alleged shooter clique. It also pulled Kevin Salter, Terrence Adams, Samaj Brown, and Marvin Lanier into a wider series of killings stretching across Los Angeles, Compton, and Inglewood. Once those names surfaced, Park Avenue no longer looked like the first stop. As prosecutors said, the same core group had been active weeks earlier. On December 6, 2021, Taylor, Irvin, Santos, Salter, and Adams allegedly drove to an RV park on East 116th Place and killed 2 men inside. The next day, 4 of them allegedly opened fire on people sitting inside a parked car at an Arco station, wounding 3 people who survived. 1 week later, on December 14th, prosecutors said Irvin and Santos joined Samaj Brown near Compton, where another man was killed and somebody nearby was wounded. Then came January 23rd, when Taylor, Irvin, and Santos allegedly arrived at the Park Avenue birthday party, where 4 more people ended up dead. Suddenly, the timeline had a different shape, with one rented house sitting near the end of a 6-week run instead of floating alone as an unexplained massacre. LAPD Chief Mitchell Moore later tied the broader violence to long-standing gang rivalries, including conflicts investigators believed could grow from social media posts or personal slights. Every defendant pleaded not guilty at their August 2023 arraignment, meaning those accusations remained allegations rather than final findings against the 7 men. Even with that larger case exposed, Park Avenue still left one question hanging, as the public record never settled exactly what brought shooters to Breahna's birthday house. That question matters for what happened next, where investigators became far more certain about why armed men crossed town toward another backyard gathering. In Long Beach, a crew traveled roughly 7 miles in 3 vehicles, thinking the people they wanted were waiting inside a Halloween party. The problem only became clear afterward, when police determined nobody at that gathering belonged to the rival gang those shooters believed they were hunting. That wrong assumption would turn another celebration into a crime scene, while people eating tacos and wearing costumes had no clue what was moving toward them. On October 29, 2019, Ingrid Cortez walked into a Halloween-themed birthday party in Long Beach's Rose Park neighborhood dressed as a ninja. Roughly 25 to 30 people had gathered behind a house on 7th Street, where Cortez grabbed tacos before sitting with co-workers from Hollywood Park Casino. Partway through the night, host Daniel Chan suddenly told everybody to get inside after word spread that he had received some kind of threatening phone call. For the next 15 or 20 minutes, guests stayed indoors, while whatever concern had spooked Chan seemed serious enough to shut the backyard down. Then Chan and his father eventually waved everybody outside again, which made it seem like the trouble had passed before anything truly wild happened. Minutes after people returned outside, Cortez heard popping sounds that she initially mistook for fireworks until she realized somebody had actually shot her. Gunfire tore across the gathering, killing 35-year-old Melvin Williams II, 28-year-old Ricardo Torres, plus 25-year-old Morris Poe Jr. 9 more people were wounded, including one woman whose injuries left her paralyzed, turning that backyard into another scene filled with people nobody expected to be targets. Police initially described a masked shooter entering through an alley, although the full picture became much bigger once investigators started tracking several vehicles. Surveillance eventually showed a Toyota 4Runner, Toyota RAV4, plus a silver Chrysler PT Cruiser traveling together from North Long Beach toward Rose Park. To understand why those cars mattered, investigators had to look at the Tiny Rascal Gangsters, whose history stretched back into Long Beach during the early 1980s. The group traced its beginnings to Cambodian refugee families whose children were reportedly attacked by members of East Side Longos after settling around Little Phnom Penh. What began as neighborhood protection eventually hardened into a street gang with rivalries involving Asian boys, Sureños, Crip sets, plus blood sets. That background mattered years later when prosecutors argued younger TRG members were taken to our Rose Park looking for enemies they believed would be there. By then, the old protection story had become something much rougher, with reputation, retaliation, plus street standing shaping what happened inside those 3 vehicles. The prosecution eventually centered its case on Jeremy Penn, David Heng Long, Kalen Thick, Ryan Sim, plus Grant Johnson, while Joshua Sam and Christopher Williams entered through getaway car allegations. According to prosecutors, Penn drove younger members like Sim, Long, plus Thick toward the party so they could earn standing by confronting supposed rivals. Joshua Sam later accepted a plea agreement and testified against other defendants, while Christopher Williams also took a deal connected with the broader case. What looked at first like one masked gunman had turned into an alleged coordinated operation involving several people moving across Long Beach together. Then Ryan Sim took the stand years later and gave jurors a version that would have cleared most of the men sitting beside him. Sim said he alone carried out the shooting, explaining that he had been jumped around that part of Long Beach roughly 5 years earlier. According to his testimony, he asked Jeremy Penn to drop him near an alley, then brought Kalen Thick along in case rivals appeared nearby. Sim described climbing onto a brick fence, crouching above the gathering, then opening fire with 2 guns while people below wore masks and costumes. He maintained his co-defendants had no advanced knowledge, although prosecutors argued the whole trip had been planned around confronting supposed gang enemies. The jury rejected Sim's lone shooter explanation, convicting Penn, Long, Thick, Sim, plus Johnson of first-degree murder and attempted murder during November 2023. By then, investigators had already made the detail that changed everything clear, since nobody attending Daniel Chan's party actually belonged to a gang. Police concluded the attackers had traveled roughly 7 miles after incorrectly believing rival members would be present at that 7th Street gathering. That meant Melvin Williams II, Ricardo Torres, Morris Poe Jr., Ingrid Cortez, plus the other wounded guests had been caught inside somebody else's mistaken street calculation. Down in Fresno that same year, another group would also choose a backyard, although their alleged motive was tied to something that happened only 16 hours earlier. On November 17, 2019, the Fresno story started before anybody gathered around a television when 28-year-old Randy Xiong was killed elsewhere in the city. Police later identified Randy's brother, Billy Xiong, as a member of the Mongolian Boys Society, an Asian street gang active around Fresno. Investigators eventually connected Randy's murder with what happened next, believing Billy's side blamed a rival group called the Asian Crips for his brother's death. That killing remained separately unsolved when arrests came later, yet detectives believed it started a revenge clock that moved frighteningly fast through the same day. While investigators still had one homicide to understand, another family across town was getting ready for Sunday night football without knowing that conflict was moving toward them. That evening, roughly 30 to 40 people gathered at a house on East Lamona Avenue to watch the Los Angeles Rams play the Chicago Bears. Among them were Xi Li, Fia Vang, Ku Xiong, plus Kalaksang Tao, with 2 of those men known locally as singers within Fresno's Hmong community. Children stayed inside the residence while about 16 men watched football outside, making the gathering look like exactly what police later called it, quiet and peaceful. Just before 8 p.m., 2 armed men came through an unlocked gate, moved toward the backyard crowd, then started firing directly at the men watching television. Witnesses could mainly make out muzzle flashes in the darkness, while bullets struck 10 people before the shooters disappeared from the property. 3 men died at the scene, while a 4th later died during surgery, leaving Xi Li, Fia Vang, Ku Xiong, plus Kalaksang Tao dead. 5 other victims between 28 and 36 years old were hospitalized with non-life-threatening injuries, while the children inside escaped the shooting physically unharmed. Police Chief Andrew Hall quickly said investigators did not believe the attack was random, although the public still lacked the explanation detectives were beginning to assemble. Officers initially discussed a recent disturbance involving some people at the gathering, leaving open questions about what had led shooters directly toward that residence. Weeks later, that thread ran back toward Randy Xiong's killing from earlier that same day, turning 2 separate Fresno crime scenes into one developing retaliation story. 6 weeks after the Backyard Massacre, police arrested Billy Xiong, Anthony Montes, Porge Quay, Johnny Xiong, Pao Vang, plus 19-year-old Giovanni Delgado. Investigators said all 6 acknowledged membership in the Mongolian Boys Society, while authorities described the football party shooting as retaliation meant to even the score. Yet, that explanation exposed the same brutal problem Long Beach investigators had already seen, with shooters apparently aiming at gang enemies inside a crowded social gathering. None of the 4 men killed were publicly tied to gang membership, leaving families mourning people who were simply watching a football game that Sunday. Billy Sheong's name surfaced again 1 month later through an arrest that initially had nothing to do with the Lamona Avenue killings. Clovis police arrested him on unrelated mail theft allegations, then recovered a modified 9mm handgun while taking him into custody during that separate investigation. Ballistics testing later linked that weapon back to the backyard massacre, giving detectives physical evidence connected with the case built around retaliation allegations. Fresno police responded by creating a dedicated Asian gang task force, worried that Randy Sheong's killing plus the football party attack might trigger another round. By then, one murder had allegedly produced 4 more deaths within 16 hours, showing how quickly a personal loss could spill into a crowded gathering. The next case would follow a different route, although another social gathering again became easy to reach once information about it spread far beyond its intended circle. In Joliet Township, Illinois, residents at 1018 East Jackson Street used social media to invite friends to a Halloween party during October 2021. That invitation kept spreading until roughly 200 people, including strangers with no connection to the hosts, packed into the property before midnight. What happened there would involve vice lords, Latin kings, brothers Thomas and Jeremy Lopez, Joscar Ramos, plus one intended target named Sergio Hernandez. By the time shots started coming from an elevated position above that crowd, another celebration had already become part of a feud most guests did not understand. By the early hours of October 31st, 2021, the Halloween party at 1018 East Jackson Street in Joliet Township had grown far beyond its original plans. Residents had invited friends through social media, then the invitation kept circulating until roughly 200 people crowded the property, including strangers who barely knew the hosts. That made this gathering different from Fresno's family football night, where relatives and friends mostly knew exactly who had been invited into the East Lamona Avenue backyard. Somewhere within that crowd was 20-year-old Sergio Hernandez, whose connection to the Latin Kings would later become central to explaining what happened next. At approximately 12:39 a.m., alleged shooters positioned themselves above the packed gathering, then started firing downward while dozens of rounds tore through people below. 22-year-old Holly Matthews was killed immediately, while Jonathan Ceballos, also 22, died during the same burst of violence that wounded more than 12 others. Guests who had arrived through an invitation bouncing around social media were suddenly trapped inside a shooting connected to a dispute most had nothing to do with. Yet, detectives soon discovered that Holly and Jonathan did not appear to be the people those gunmen had actually come looking for that Halloween night. The man investigators identified as the apparent target was Sergio Hernandez, who survived the initial attack but suffered injuries that completely changed the rest of his life. Hernandez had been shot in the shoulder, with the damage eventually leaving him paralyzed from the neck down, while investigators started pulling apart his street connections. Their investigation eventually centered on brothers Thomas Lopez and Jeremy Lopez, alongside Joscar Ramos, whom authorities accused of participating in the Halloween shooting. The case moved quickly against Ramos, who was arrested on November 5th, only 5 days after gunfire ripped through the East Jackson Street gathering. During that arrest, deputies said an officer spotted Ramos trying to hide a firearm on his own roof, while the Lopez brothers were arrested days afterward. At first, those arrests made the situation look like a straightforward local feud between Vice Lords members and a Latin King's target caught inside an enormous party. Then another name, David Grijalva, started changing how authorities described the conflict, pulling attention away from broad gang labels towards something considerably more personal. Police described Grijalva as a Vice Lord's associate, initially charging him in a related attempted murder case involving another man who fled the Halloween shooting. Years later, prosecutors expanded his alleged role dramatically, charging him in October 2024 with 12 first-degree murder counts, 5 aggravated battery counts involving a firearm, plus 1 weapons charge. More importantly, prosecutors alleged the conflict originated through a personal feud between Grijalva and Hernandez, giving investigators a specific relationship beneath the wider street affiliations. Grijalva's attorney, Rajiv Bajaj, challenged those accusations, maintaining his client's innocence while arguing prosecutors lacked enough evidence to secure a conviction against him. Meanwhile, the broader case kept grinding through court for years, showing how slowly investigators and prosecutors were reconstructing what happened during those few minutes outside East Jackson Street. Thomas Lopez also challenged statements he made during police questioning, arguing illness from COVID-19 made the interview involuntary while he was reportedly vomiting during questioning. A Will County judge rejected that attempt by mid-2025, leaving the defendants moving separately through proceedings tied back to the same crowded Halloween gathering. There was another wrinkle behind those street labels, since vice lords and Latin kings have historically appeared under the same broad people-nation alliance structure. On paper, that connection might make the East Jackson Street violence look unusual, although Joliet's local gang landscape never operated neatly according to national alliance charts. Local sets, individual personalities, neighborhood disputes, plus personal grudges could override wider affiliations, particularly 35 miles southwest of Chicago's better-known gang territories. That context made the alleged Hernandez-Grijalva feud important, as prosecutors were describing two men whose personal conflict apparently mattered more than whatever larger alliance existed elsewhere. So the party had not simply attracted rival labels into one backyard, since investigators believed one particular dispute helped put a target among roughly 200 guests. While those cases moved through court, Sergio Hernandez remained alive, although paralysis from the shooting kept him quadriplegic for more than a year afterward. In January, Hernandez died from complications involving chronic respiratory failure connected to his paralysis and the original gunshot wound sustained that Halloween. 15 months after the shooters left East Jackson Street, the body count had changed without another bullet being fired, showing how consequences kept developing long afterward. That same delayed investigative pattern would surface in Richmond, where evidence from another party shooting eventually reached 10 miles beyond its original crime scene. Months before the Joliet shooting, Father's Day on June 20, 2021 brought roughly 100 people onto the 2100 block of Dunn Avenue in Richmond, California. The gathering combined an American Father's Day celebration with a traditional Guatemalan summer solstice event, while marimba music played for guests who arrived throughout the evening. Facebook had helped spread information about the party, meaning many attendees were strangers who had discovered the gathering online rather than relatives personally invited by one family. That detail would later matter to Richmond investigators, since whoever approached Dunn Avenue could not simply assume everybody standing there belonged to one connected circle. Yet, shortly before 11 p.m., gunfire reached the celebration anyway, striking 8 people before those gathered could understand why somebody had targeted the property. Andres Morales Garcia, Rudy Godinez Aguilar, plus Hector Rigoberto Carrillo Ruiz were killed, while another victim suffered a liver wound severe enough to require a medically induced coma. A nearby resident named Mario Moreno returned toward his front door and discovered one dead victim lying outside his gate, bringing the violence directly onto neighboring property. Another local man later explained that his uncle, roughly 37 years old and known for selling fruit around the neighborhood, was among those killed that night. Police found no indication that the suspected shooters had spent the evening inside the party, instead believing they walked toward the scene before leaving in a nearby vehicle. Investigators considered the shooting targeted, even though the people struck would eventually expose another massive gap between who the shooters expected and who was actually present. The investigation eventually led prosecutors toward Enrique Ramirez Calmo and Giovanni Garcia Jacinto, whom authorities identified as members of Southside Locos 502. Prosecutors described that group as a predominantly Guatemalan-American Sureño-affiliated gang whose primary rivals included a Norteño set operating out of nearby Oakland. That rivalry gave investigators a possible reason for armed men approaching Dunn Avenue, although Deputy District Attorney Chad Mihalich later presented one crucial detail to jurors. None of the Father's Day victims had any gang affiliation, while prosecutors said the shooters wrongly assumed rival members would appear at the celebration. Richmond had therefore landed on the same problem Long Beach encountered in 2019, where somebody's expectation about a party became deadlier than the reality inside it. To understand how old that hostility could run around Richmond, the story stretches backward to 2009, long before Facebook advertised the Dunn Avenue celebration. That year, Norteño men Alvaro Garcia Pena and Imtiaz Ahmed were killed at point-blank range with a shotgun inside Richmond's Alvarado's bar and grill. Prosecutors connected those killings to the Sureño-Norteño conflict, with the victims reportedly targeted simply for wearing red while sitting inside the restaurant. One Sureño later pleaded guilty and received 25 years, yet the broader rivalry remained active across communities where clothing, territory, plus perceived affiliation could carry consequences. More than a decade later, prosecutors would place Southside Locos 502 members inside that wider conflict while explaining why suspected rivals were supposedly expected at Dunn Avenue. However, Richmond's investigation soon stretched beyond old rivalries, since another shooting had erupted roughly 10 miles away during that same Father's Day and Juneteenth weekend. Around 5,000 people were gathered near Oakland's Lake Merritt when gunfire killed a 22-year-old San Francisco man, while 6 other people suffered wounds. Witness accounts circulated describing an argument inside the crowd, while 2 armed men were reportedly seen fleeing before arrests, although police never confirmed exactly what triggered that violence. At first, Oakland's massive Juneteenth gathering and Richmond's smaller Guatemalan celebration appeared to be separate crime scenes handled by different police departments. Then, investigators obtained ballistic evidence showing a firearm connected with the Oakland shooting matched one associated with the Richmond attack occurring that same night. That physical connection widened the case considerably, while prosecutors built their Richmond prosecution using cell phone evidence plus statements Ramirez Calmo had made during questioning. One cell phone recording was reportedly filmed by a murder victim around the shooting, giving investigators another piece of evidence from somebody caught directly inside the attack. Ramirez Calmo's defense challenged his confession, arguing he fabricated the account to avoid being viewed as a snitch within his own gang environment. Prosecutors disagreed, combining those statements with cell phone material, ballistic evidence, plus their gang theory when the case finally reached a Contra Costa County jury. In February 2024, jurors convicted 29-year-old Ramirez Calmo of 3 murders, 4 attempted murders, plus gang and firearm enhancements carrying the possibility of life imprisonment. Garcia Jacinto's path remained separate since he had still been a teenager when the Dunn Avenue shooting occurred and was being prosecuted through juvenile court. Authorities also accused him of an unrelated homicide, with reporting describing charges involving 4 murders allegedly committed while he was still legally a minor. Ramirez Calmo, meanwhile, had been identified by authorities as a suspect in 2 unrelated Oakland homicides from 2019, although prosecutors never charged him in those killings. Those additional allegations showed how the Dunn Avenue investigation kept branching into other events, much like Park Avenue eventually opened onto several earlier shootings around Los Angeles. Across these cases, one party repeatedly became the entry point into something larger, exposing disputes and alleged activity that had started long before guests arrived. That brings the story back to Breahna Stines, who was celebrating her 20th birthday in Inglewood, while Marneysha Hamilton came to spend that night beside her sister. It also returns to Ingrid Cortez eating tacos in a ninja costume before Long Beach gunfire killed Melvin Williams II, Ricardo Torres, plus Morris Poe Jr. in Fresno, Zai Li, Phia Vang, Ku Xiong, plus Calaxang Thao were watching Sunday Night Football while a 16-hour retaliation timeline developed outside their gathering. Joliet placed Holly Matthews and Jonathan Ceballos inside a party where investigators identified Sergio Hernandez as the apparent target, although his wounds ultimately made him another homicide victim. Richmond finished the pattern with Andres Morales Garcia, Rudy Godinez Aguilar, plus Hector Rigoberto Carrillo Ruiz, attending a celebration where prosecutors said the expected rivals never appeared. The 5 cities involved different groups, including East Coast Crips 118, Tiny Rascal Gangsters, Mongolian Boys Society, Vice Lords, Latin Kings, plus Southside Locos 502. Their investigations also unfolded differently, ranging from surveillance footage and multi-car movements to ballistics, cell phone recordings, alleged confessions, witness testimony, plus arrests arising from unrelated crimes. Still, police and prosecutors repeatedly described deliberate attacks driven by retaliation, mistaken identity, gang rivalry, or the belief that particular enemies would be present. Many people actually struck had no documented stake in those disputes, including birthday guests, Hmong community singers, co-workers, relatives, plus strangers drawn through social media invitations. That is what connected all 5 nights most clearly. The celebrations were still happening when conflicts that began somewhere else finally reached the people inside them.